Well, greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs, and welcome to Robservations, the show about something. This is Robservations number 269, which is amazing. And you Imagination Connoisseurs that make up this, the Post-Geek Singularity, are here today. And before I begin, I would like to read something. Remember, the 5th of November. The gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes and his companions did the scheme contrive to blow the king and parliament all up alive. 70 barrels laid below to prove old England's overthrow. But by God's providence, him they catch with a dark lantern lighting a match. A stick and a stake for King James' sake. If you won't give me one, I'll take two. The better for me, the worse for you. A rope to hang the Pope. A pen'orth of cheese to choke him. A pint of beer to wash it down. And a jolly good fire to burn him. Halloa boys, make the bells ring. Halloa boys, God save the king. Hip, hip, hooray. That's for you guys. I just love that. It only comes along once a year, and I've never been able to do that on Robservations, so yay! Of course, half the audience is going, what? But I'll leave that up to you to decide. Figure it out for yourselves, people. But it's good to have you all here. Good to have you Imagination Connoisseurs here on this, the November 5 of 2019. Guy Fawkes Day, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, Guy Fawkes Day. And it's here. Guy Fawkes, of course, the legend of Guy Fawkes was immortalized in Alan Moore's comic V for Vendetta, later turned into a movie that was produced by the Wachowskis, which I actually think is a really good movie. If you guys have not watched V for Vendetta with Hugo Weaving as V and, of course, Natalie Portman, I really like V for Vendetta, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. I really liked the comic book as well. I read the comic book, of course, when it was originally published in England, and then it was reprinted by DC Comics here. And I think it's David Lloyd and Alan Moore. I found the comic book, I loved it, but it's a little murky in terms of the art and the storytelling. When I mean murky, like literally murky, it's a little difficult to follow the story, and that's okay. Another thing that happened today that I think is fantastic, of course, as you all know, Jonathan Mayberry's latest book, Joe Ledger series. I love these books so much. I already read the first 20 pages right before I went online. I got it in the mail, popped it open, read the first 20 pages. It opened with literally, I was going to say a burst of action, bursts of gunfire in Aleppo, Syria, because, you know, it's one of these things. If you guys have not read Jonathan Mayberry's Joe Ledger series, do yourselves a favor. And if you like The X-Files, like I told you, this is like Jack Ryan. It's Tom Clancy meets The X-Files, and I dearly love these books. Mayberry's been putting one out a year for, I think, maybe a decade now. Now, there was a big shakeup in the series at the end of last year's Deep Silence, and I won't explain it because I won't spoil anything. But this new book, Rage, promises to be great. It's already started out great. Looking forward to it. And the way he weaves in everything from aliens to zombies to Cthulhu to Jekyll and Hyde to Dracula. I mean, it's great. The series is great. Why it hasn't been turned into a movie yet, or it should be a series, really, I don't know. And of course, Jonathan Mayberry, he had edited a book of short stories, V Wars, the Vampire Wars, that is now it's been turned into a Netflix series. I think it drops in December or something. But Mayberry's written comics. He's a very prolific horror writer. I'm a big fan of his, and the Joe Ledger series is a favorite series of mine. The only problem is they come out once a year. I'll be done with this book in 24 hours. So, and it's sad. I mean, I don't like how fast I whip through these books because I enjoy them so much, but you can't read them slowly. It's not like you don't page through them like, oh, I'll read 4 pages. You can't do that. The pacing is a breakneck pace. It's great. Anyway, if I could recommend just a fun, really fun series of books to read, if you like if you like modern military stuff combined with supernatural stuff or super science stuff, the Joe Ledger books are for you. And also, if you've ever been to Dragon Con, I won't tell you, one of the books, he actually destroys Dragon Con in a very amusing way, and I thought that was terrific. These chats are, of course, brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, you get 20% off of your order. So, I was looking for a subject today, and I was contacted by Chris Gore of Film Threat, and he told me that there was an article on the Film Threat page that I thought which was sort of interesting. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll talk about that. And this article that was on the front page of Film Threat, it was published yesterday. It was written by Dante James, and the title of the article was Finding the Next Great Comic Book Movie Franchise. And it's interesting because, once again, the approach, I'm sure, ever since with the great success of the MCU, and I know even before the MCU, comic books have become a huge resource for films and television, even outside of DC and Marvel. Of course, The Boys and The Umbrella Academy, neither one of those were published by the big two, and they turned them into great. I mean, I really like The Umbrella Academy, and I love The Boys, and those are both comics that I possessed and have read, but very surprised at how effectively they were turned into shows. Both have, of course, been renewed. I can't wait to see either season. And it just goes to show you that you don't necessarily need a cinematic universe to create an ongoing concern when it comes to comic books. Now, what was really interesting is that, as you may or may not know, Vin Diesel is coming out in a movie called Bloodshot. And Bloodshot is based on the Valiant Comics universe. And Valiant Comics really hit the scene back in the late 80s. And they had repurposed, they had acquired comics that previously existed, like Solar Man of the Atom, which was published by Gold Key. But they created their own sort of universe, and Valiant Comics, for a while there, when they first hit the scene, were quite good. Now, we've seen online versions of Valiant characters before in short form pieces on the internet, but Bloodshot is the first feature film, and starring Vin Diesel, that is based on one of the Valiant comic books from their universe. Now, this article, I'll read a little bit from this article that Dante James wrote. Comic book movies are here to stay. Sorry, Martin and Francis. And as a fan of that type of cinema, I couldn't be happier. We obviously have Marvel Entertainment to thank for paving the way. They not only created the most successful franchises in film history, they've also set the standard going forward for comic books and, most importantly, shared universes. But with their groundbreaking Infinity Saga concluded, the question has to be asked, who's next? With the vacuum Marvel has created, it provides a way for publishers with exciting new characters to be considered by the studios and get their own movie versions. Valiant has had a stake in the comic community since the early 90s, and to the fans who have read their titles for the past 30 years, it seems like a no-brainer that many of the characters should get their moment on the big screen. Valiant recently made the big move with Bloodshot, starring Vin Diesel, which is set to hit theaters in 2020. Valiant is clearly positioned to be the next Marvel, with a deep bench of characters and storytelling spanning thousands of years. If Bloodshot turns out to be a hit, there are more than enough characters to build a Valiant cinematic universe. Valiant is the last connected comic book universe with over 2,000 individual and team-up characters with interwoven crossover storylines that span time and space. Get ready for the Valiant cinematic universe. And these are just some of the comics that should have their own theatrical versions. Well, let me just stop right there and say, there's a lot of comic book adaptations that are currently not part of cinematic universes that could continue, whether they're on television or in the movies. Judge Dredd, of course, that comes out of the pages of 2000 AD. I first started reading Judge Dredd. I'd seen sporadic issues of 2000 AD when I was a kid, But Eagle Comics published Judge Dredd in standard comic form in the early 80s, early to mid 80s. That's where I first came in contact with Judge Dredd. And there are a lot of characters in the 2080 universe. I'm not aware, I don't know if 2080, if they own everything. I don't know what the ownership rights, but they're, characters like Strontium Dog, and of course the Judge Dredd, the whole universe there. And one of my favorites, which I think would make an incredible, hilarious R-rated science fiction romp, DR and Quinch. DR and Quinch were great characters created by Alan Moore. Could be a sci-fi version of Deadpool, sort of, in a way. It's again, these things could be great. They could be ripe for adaptation. Of course, other graphic novels and movies that aren't necessarily superheroes. We've seen things like Road to Perdition. We've seen Ghost World, American Splendor. Harvey Picar's work was touched on that, or touched on by that movie. Harvey Picar himself. So there's a lot of comic books. Again, this idea that I think, and I'm sure Valiant was thinking when they made Bloodshot, this is the beginning of their own universe. But there's something that I think is missing from that conversation. And this article goes on, and I'll read more in a minute what it touches on in terms of the comics. But here's the thing. The Burnett axiom holds: never put your universe before your characters or your stories. And everybody wants to have these shared universes as if the shared universes are, in fact, the reason for the great success of these films. Well, I would remind everyone that we're now living in a world where a standalone mid-level Joker film, which was budgeted a little over $60 million, is closing in on $1 billion at the worldwide box office. Very improbably, a movie like The Joker is, by any stretch of the imagination, it's one of the most profitable studio movies ever made, certainly in the modern age. So what can be learned from this? Well, what needs to be understood first and foremost is it cannot be forgotten that Joker is a Batman spinoff. So the great success of Joker cannot, of course, be underestimated. It's a significant achievement. But you're still talking about a character that's from the Bat universe. And Batman has been a vibrant box office mainstay since, well, for 30 years, since 1989's Tim Burton's Batman came out in the summer of 1989. Now, certainly Batman Returns, Batman Forever, and then Batman and Robin were diminishing levels of success. But then we, of course, had the Nolan trilogy. We had Batfleck showing up in Batman v Superman. We had Justice League. Suicide Squad, Batman appeared in. All these movies, well, with the exception of Justice League, Batman is somebody that's always going to make money on the big screen. So Joker certainly had a leg up. Now, remember also that the DC and Marvel characters, audiences, 4 quadrants worth of audiences, have a long history with these characters. They've been around. Some of them have been around closing in now on a century, but certainly the Marvel Cinematic Universe, those characters have been around for more than a half century, a lot of them. I mean, even Black Panther was introduced in 1966. So you have a pop culture memory of these characters. The Valiant universe does not have that because Valiant, there's not the animated series, there's not the long history. I mean, if you read Valiant comics, and I did, there was a lot of great work that was being done by Valiant. But they certainly don't have the pop culture memory or recognition that DC and Marvel do. So I think it's going to be really interesting. Bloodshot's going to be an interesting test, because if Bloodshot is indeed a good film, and it looks to me, it looks rather derivative of everything we saw. Upgrade, Lee Whannell's Upgrade, that looks a little Bloodshot-esque. Bloodshot obviously was a mainstay of the Valiant comic universe, but it has a lot of heavy lifting to do if it's going to be a cornerstone of what they're hoping to be a new cinematic universe. Now, this article goes on to touch on Archer and Armstrong, which is a Valiant comic, originally written and illustrated in 1992 by the brilliantly talented Barry Windsor Smith, an incredible comic creator, obviously. and rebooted as a Harvey Award nominated title in 2014 by Fred Van Lente. Archer and Armstrong is the kind of buddy action comedy franchise that Hollywood loves. The fact that these characters also play a pivotal role in the Valiant comic book universe means their integration into a Valiant cinematic universe would be that much easier. Armstrong is an immortal who's been around since ancient times, for 10,000 years, has been a part of almost every significant historical event. He's also a nihilistic drunk. Think Wolverine, except more drunk. And instead of claws, he has a supernatural satchel that he can pull almost any item from. He meets Archer, who's a boy trained to be an assassin meant to kill him, but they end up becoming buddies by circumstance. This unlikely pair is comedy gold and dramatically different than the kind of heroes in tights and capes. Any universe featuring Armstrong would lend a strong possibility to the introduction of his two brothers, also immortals, one a brilliant time traveler, the other one the fiercest of warriors. Now, what's interesting, Archer and Armstrong, again, when you make an Archer and Armstrong movie, and they've been trying to do that for quite some time. There was at one point, my buddy Michael Davis, who directed Shoot 'Em Up, was involved in pitching an Archer and Armstrong movie, I guess, a decade ago. Now, that's a film that you could do, but again, it has to stand on its own. So what Valiant's going to have to do is it's going to have to make these films. They got to follow the Burnett axiom. They got to forget about their universe, and they have to concentrate on establishing these characters and making them beloved in their own movies, and then spinning them off together into other kinds of features. Perhaps they cross over with Bloodshot if Bloodshot's successful. You know, this idea that you're trying to build a cinematic universe before you've established characters and story with audiences is, of course, difficult. And it's something that everybody wants to do. We saw the Dark Universe fall by the wayside. And the Dark Universe was, of course, going to use Universal's stable of monsters to build from. But that didn't really work out too well. They were announcing their universe before The Mummy even came out. This article goes on to say Exo Manowar. Exo Manowar is the centerpiece of the Valiant universe. He's easily their most recognizable character and probably their most successful title. What Exo Manowar gives us is a Guardians of the Galaxy, Flash Gordon-esque space opera with a hero displaced out of time in a power suit made of symbiotic alien technology. It's an actual living piece of tech, which adds a whole other dimension to the story. Given the right cast and respectable budget, it has the potential to be a huge hit. If Ryan Gosling is looking to get into comic book movies, this would be the perfect fit. The problem, though, is, again, just because these are comic books, like anything else, it's extremely difficult to turn them into movies that work. It really is. It's a very tough call. And unless you have a creative team in place like the Marvel Cinematic Universe did in Kevin Feige, then it's really difficult because you're just back to square one. You might as well be adapting anything. How many movies have been adapted that didn't work? Catwoman had a long history. We had Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns, and when Halle Berry, a dream role for her, went to make Catwoman, and she had a lot to say about how that movie was going to get made. It did not turn out well. So there is no guarantee, even if a character has been around for decades, that a movie is going to necessarily work. So you can't just jump into these characters and make it happen. There are other characters that this article goes into. Livewire, another Valiant character. Shadow Man. Punk Mambo. There's the Books of Magic from Vertigo, which is a very Harry Potter-esque kind of thing. It's sort of a spin-off of the Sandman. Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, which could make for a heck of a series. If they can make Doom Patrol work, I love The Invisibles. I think The Invisibles is a great series. The article goes on to mention The Few and the Cursed, which it's an indie comic. Skies of Fire. Sex Criminals. How about this for a premise? Sex Criminals. Imagine if you had the power to stop time every time you had an orgasm. This is the story of Susie and John, who, after stopping time when they have sex, decide to use that frozen hour to rob banks, stores, and people standing on street corners. That is till, of course, the time cops, you read that right, get wind of their activities and decide to hunt them down. This book is hilarious from start to finish, and a movie based on this concept starring some of the funniest comedic actors would be a guaranteed R-rated hit. Hack Slash is a comic they've been trying to adapt for a long time. A comic called Night of the Cadillacs. It's the Warriors meets the Lost Boys. Supernatural gangs battle each other for territory, food, and blood rights. I mean, hey, could that work out? And of course, Frank Miller's mainstay, Give Me Liberty. With the current political climate where it is, Give Me Liberty is positioned perfectly as a story for the big screen. Written by comic veteran Frank Miller, the story is set in a dystopian United States, torn apart by factions and the power of corporations in this new world. The lead in this story is a black woman named Martha Washington, and discovers through her many talents with a computer a major government conspiracy is at play. Now, that sounds good to me. There's all kinds of comics. One of my favorite comics that I've wanted to see, one of my very favorite comics of all time, is Howard Chaykin's American Flag from the early 80s. Luc Besson's company had licensed this comic to make into a film maybe almost a decade ago now. Or, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. I'm not sure. Haven't heard anything about it since I read that it was optioned. And that happens all the time too. But there is, again, no guarantee that there's going to be, there's really only two cinematic universes with the kind of legacy that could give rise to the MCU, and that is Marvel and DC. Whether you believe that or not, I mean, the proof's in the pudding. And I'll tell you something, even DC, an Aquaman movie, which is essentially a standalone movie, that made $1 billion. Joker, again, closing in on $1 billion. Batman v Superman made over $800 million, but it was very expensive. But the thing is, you can't just take comic books and turn them into things that are ultimately going to be wildly successful. That's not how it works. You still have to have great characters and a great story. And while comic books are a great jumping off point, they're no different from books or, heck, even songs. So it's really interesting. I know everyone's scrambling around themselves to try and figure out what is the next great cinematic universe. But rather than even do that, just concentrate. Again, look at The Boys. That's a single comic book. But there's enough in those comics that they can turn them into a long-running show. The Walking Dead is based on a comic book, a long-running comic book. And look what they've done with that. I mean, they've created a shared universe on television with zombies. Who would have ever thought that was even possible? But it's very interesting that that even the Valiant universe could happen. I mean, I'm surprised they haven't tried to start a 2000 AD universe based on. I'm going to put in the, by the way, in the description or in the live chat, I just punched in the actual link to the article on Film Threat, which you should check out. Of course, everyone knows, by the way, as an aside, our moderator and the man who basically runs the Burnettwork website, Mike Bodden, is fighting for his political life today, ladies and gentlemen, in Riverdale, Iowa. That's right, they're voting, and we will know by tomorrow if Mike Bodden is still the honorable mayor of Riverdale, Iowa. His 2-year stint could have come to an end today. We shall see. Either way, it's exciting. It's exciting. I'm overjoyed to know somebody who's a mayor of a small American city, much less have him be our moderator and friend. So that's very, very exciting. So vote for Mike. I don't think any of us live in Riverdale, Iowa, but if we did, get out there and vote for Mike Bodden, because why not? JB Bonifacio is here. The next great comic book cinematic universe, he asks. How about the first great video game cinematic universe? We're due for a good one any year now. Well, look, there are characters that I think would be cool in movies. I mean, Sanosuke from, I love the Onimusha franchise. I love Devil May Cry. Maybe you could cross those over. But I think there's a reason why video game movies are sort of difficult, because inherently the stories in video game movies, now that's not to say that The Last of Us isn't a great story. I've talked about the Uncharted franchise. for the first time when I played Uncharted, the first Uncharted. I was caught up in the story. It was the very first time that I wasn't as eager to get to the next level of gameplay. I was caught up. I was caught up in the characters. I was caught up in the storyline. I was caught up. I love the voice acting, and as video games have become much more, Death Stranding, which I haven't played yet. I mean, from what I know of the film, what a wild movie that could, or what I know of the game, what a wild movie that could make. But I just think inherently the problem with video games is you have to adapt the gameplay and turn it into some kind of a story. And I think that's easier said than done. I think there's a lot of things like, for instance, the subtleties of character motivation and things like that. Yeah, look what happened with Assassin's Creed. I think it's just, there's not enough ultimately. You think there might be, but when you actually sit down and have to create, there is a shorthand when it comes to video game character creation that I think is something that needs to be surmounted when you're bringing these characters to the big screen. I mean, it has worked. Lara Croft was a video game character, and there's been 3 movies with her. So maybe they could work. I don't think, say, the upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog is going to be the groundbreaking video game movie we all hope. I know we all hope it could be, but JB, we shall see about that. I don't know. I don't know about video game movies. I really don't know. I mean, as much as I like Dante from Devil May Cry, and I like a lot of those Capcom games, so Dante rolls around and kills basically the same kind of creatures over and over again, and you have big boss battles. I don't know if that would really work. I don't know. Maybe it can, but I would think that there's other places, whether it's novels or comics, there's other places to look, I think, that are more secure in terms of having better stories. I think inherently a video game is just different than whether it's a book or whether it's a comic. The storytelling is inherently sort of different. That doesn't mean you can't. I mean, I hope Springs Eternal, they're making another Mortal Kombat movie. Maybe that'll be the big breakthrough film that people go, man, that was transcendent. So people are going to still try. Koba is here. Koba says people shouldn't be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. Well said. Yes. Willow Yang has been, she says, I've been clamoring for Aragorn to be our leader since hearing his speech at the Black Gate 15 years ago. I tweeted sort of a funny parody article about people throwing their support behind Aragorn in the upcoming election. I wish. I think Aragorn would make a fine leader. Unfortunately, we just do we have anybody who's up to snuff as far as leadership is concerned? Is anybody as good as Aragorn? I don't know. And certainly having fought in the War of the Ring, it's he knows a lot. He'd be a good leader, I think, especially if he was played by Viggo Mortensen. Kyle McCaskill says Bible superhero movies could be huge. Imagine a superpowered teenage Jesus being trained by an angel to fight Lucifer, who is after a MacGuffin. Well, that sounds like the Prophecy franchise, which I really liked. I thought the Prophecy franchise was pretty good. Like the first one with Christopher Walken, you never know. But yeah, it's interesting. Could you adapt? Like I'm waiting for somebody to make the definitive modern Job movie. I've always loved the story of Job. Robert Heinlein wrote a book called Job, A Comedy of Justice. I mean, I would love to see a Job movie could really be cool. But then again, it doesn't exactly hit the same buttons as, say, a comic book film does, unless maybe you could make one that way. You never know. I don't know if Bible superhero movies would fly. Somebody would probably find them offensive in some way, shape, or form, that you're not representing the characters and correctly, which is interesting. But it could be fun. Like I would watch. I mean, look, biblical movies were huge. They used to be huge. You had everything from Samson and Delilah, or The Robe, or Ben-Hur, King of Kings. I mean, they made lots of Bible movies decades ago, and what if I've always thought somebody should do the epic Second Coming movie, but not, and people have tried it in different unique ways, but not as like a faith-based Left Behind movie, but like, what would that be like? But they've done that. I think a movie like Jesus of Montreal, something like that. Be kind of interesting to see that done. Dieter Bastian says, Rob, I've seen you on the John Campea show. You don't have to feel bad alone. You don't have to feel bad alone for buying ID4 Resurgence or Dark Phoenix on Blu-ray. Guess who has these titles too? Well, Dieter, I would imagine you do. I bought Dark Phoenix in 4K. It's funny. Watching Dark Phoenix, and Elizabeth and I watched it this weekend. And something really struck me about Dark Phoenix. And I'm surprised, it went through a lot of reshoots. I don't hate Dark Phoenix. I don't. I like the performances, and I think the story that they're telling is a good one. But what was really missing for me was the antagonists. And I'm surprised that the antagonists, they have a presence on Earth, and when the creature that Jessica Chastain is inhabited by shows up, I think what they really needed to do was bolster this group of aliens that have sort of lured the Phoenix Force to Earth. And I don't know if they were engineering this kind of thing to happen, and they had much more of a presence and you knew more about them. I think the movie would have been much, much better. And when you get to the final battle at the end, you just don't know anything about these aliens, and they've had an intriguing backstory, and it just isn't developed. And so everything, you're just kind of watching these scenes lurch from one to the next, and there was nothing cohesive there. It wasn't like certainly Days of Future Past, when you're very much aware of what's going on. The premise is set up from the beginning. And I also think that how Sophie Turner's Jean Grey was being consumed by the Phoenix Force was not very well fleshed out, and it just could have been done much better than it was. But it's not a train wreck by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not that good, and I think it's sort of a bummer, because I would love to have seen that movie turn out to be a bit better. Dan V900 says Black Hammer has the best chance of being successful as a universe, and Jeff Lemire will be involved in the shows and movies which are in development now. Dr. Star was the best miniseries last year. Now, I've only heard about Black Hammer. I haven't read it, but yeah, Jeff Lemire is a great writer, and I think that'd be great as long as he stays involved. But that's also no guarantee that you really need people that understand how to make television or movies to make it work. Even though you have Jeff Lemire involved, you still need a great showrunner. You need a great director, and you need, writing comics isn't necessarily a guarantee that you're going to be a great television or movie writer. So hopefully, I would love to see now in this day and age, what we're getting from comic book movies has been tremendous. It really has. Doom Patrol, Umbrella Academy, like I brought up earlier, and of course, The Boys most recently. That's some great stuff. It's too bad like Deadly Class didn't do as well as I would have hoped. I would like to have seen that go. Rick Remender's Deadly Class. I liked a lot of what was going on there. I would like to have seen that continue. It's too bad that it won't, or at least not anytime soon. Gary Ritchie says, I would love to see a Madman film. Didn't Mike Allred direct a low-budget film? I don't know. I seem to vaguely remember that he might have. Madman, not Madmen, but Madman, Mike Allred's Madman, another great character. I'd love to see that. I think that would be, but again, you would really need somebody who knew that material. Just like I would really like to see, look, my dream, not just American Flag, but I love Grendel. If you haven't read Matt Wagner's Grendel, I think you could do the whole premise of that comic, and the way they reinvent the character of Grendel from story arc to story arc is amazing. And Grendel could be a fantastic comic book series. Hell, Grendel even, of course, crossed over famously with Batman. So I'd love to see a Grendel movie. And, they've been trying to develop that, or Mage. They've been trying forever to make those kinds of movies. Who knows if they're ever going to happen? But, we hope springs eternal. Now, that brings me to a letter from our own Stubble McShave. Stubble says, "Hello, Laser Bob. The other day, a Post-Geek Singularity member wrote in about the big idea and how important that was for storytelling. You gave an excellent answer, but I'd like to contribute with an anecdote that author Jim Butcher of the Dresden Files," I know the Dresden Files is between that and Wheel of Time. I know you're a big fan. Often tells. In the beginning of his career, he was often on different internet forums discussing things about writing. In a heated discussion about how important is the great idea, he represented the side of the idea is not all that important. The important thing is how you develop it and make your own spin on the idea. The other side argued that the idea is everything, and they often brought up the idea behind Jurassic Park as an example of a great idea that was destined for success. This went on for a while, and the discussion had reached a point where they communicated with caps lock activated, essentially screaming at each other. It finally reached the point where the other guy dared Jim Butcher and said, "Okay, put your money where your mouth is. I will give you a bad idea, and then you write a good story based on that idea." Whereupon Jim Butcher retorted with, "I'll tell you what, you give me 2 bad ideas, and I'll write a great story and use both of them." "All right," Jim's opponent said. "The first idea is the Lost Roman Legion. I'm tired of all the stories about the Lost Roman Legion. They should have been found by now." "Okay, what's the second one?" The guy said, "Pokemon." Jim went and researched the Lost Roman Legion and Pokemon. The Lost Roman Legion is often in reference to the Ninth Legion, which went missing in northern Britain in the early 2nd century AD. It consisted of soldiers from the Roman Empire and was reinforced with legionnaires from the Germanic provinces. The legion was probably wiped out by the natives of today's Scotland. Pokemon is essentially the combination of such nature spirits that can be found in the Shinto religion combined with professional wrestling. Since Jim is an uber nerd, he was of course watching Big Trouble in Little China and heard the word Furies, which was a great name for the nature spirits. The Furies became the basis of the magic system. It seems that the Lost Roman Legion were not killed off by angry Celts. Instead, they got lost and they were transported to the land of the Furies. The different ethnic groups of Roman legions were left to evolve during a millennia or so in the land of Pokemon and learn to use these nature spirits. Jim wrote 6 bestsellers in this fantasy series called the Codex Alera and proved to the world that it's not about having the greatest idea in the world. It's about how you develop the ideas and how you put your own spin on things that matter. In conclusion, having great ideas are great, but ideas are cheap and come by the dozen. It's how you execute your ideas that matter. I'd like to end this with a quote from Jim Butcher's most recognized work, The Dresden Files. Quote, "So, you get handed a holy sword by an archangel, told to go fight the forces of evil, and you somehow remain an atheist. Is that what you're saying?" Unquote. Thanks, Stubble McShave. Well, Stubble, that's a great letter. I really enjoyed that letter, and you're right. I mean, look, you could take any idea, and it's all about the execution. I think more often than not, good ideas end up suffering because of bad execution, which is always kind of a bummer. That's not something that you ever really want to have happen, but it does, probably all too often. The idea for Jurassic Park, Charles Pellegrino, I was talking about him last week during Halloween. I wrote something on my I talked about something from one of his novels that I put on my Facebook page. But Charles Pellegrino wrote a book that, and I've talked about it before on this show, but I'll talk about it again. He wrote a book called Dust. And I read recently that somebody had optioned Dust to turn into a movie. Dust, for whatever reason, was a book that really got under my skin. I really found it existentially disturbing. and of course, Pellegrino came up with the idea of Jurassic Park that blood in mosquitoes trapped in amber could be used to clone dinosaurs. Well, that's a great idea. So Jurassic Park, his idea for Jurassic Park is a good idea, but Michael Crichton put a pretty good spin on it when he wrote Jurassic Park and the sequel, The Lost World. He really, I think, did a pretty good job with that premise and ran with it. It could have been done really shoddily and not nearly as effective. But so in Pellegrino's book, Dust, very simple premise. The idea is that for whatever reason, nobody understands why, insects, all the insects, not arachnids, but insects have died out. And if you know anything about your biology and how the food chain works, this would be devastating for the planet, because there are things that no longer have predators like dust mites and things like that would be eaten by other insects that would then be able to, the book opens, if I remember correctly, the book opens, I want to say it opens on a beach like in Rio de Janeiro. I read so many books that the details all blend together, but like there was a couple frolicking on the beach and they look down the beach and they see what looks like a cloud of smoke or something kind of just lazily rolling down the beach toward them. And it's really a cloud of dust mites that have gone unchecked because their natural predators are gone, and it rolls over them. It just rolls over these two characters, and they get stripped to the bone by like a cloud of 1 billion dust mites. And of course, everything that might happen as a result of that was in this book. And it was a disaster novel, and it wasn't exactly subtle. It was a big, brassy disaster novel. But the idea of the insects dying out, there was something that really disturbed me about it and what it meant for our ecosystem and how fragile the ecosystem is. So when you hear about things like colony collapse disorder with bees and things like that, I'm like, oh man, we would be in such a world of hurt if that were to happen. I mean, more so than some virulent zombie plague or some super flu. The death of all of the insects really bothered me when I read the book, and it was something I didn't stop thinking about for a long period of time. So again, I don't know how you make a movie out of that and make it effective, because it's hard to detail the fact that when your threat is the loss of something, and you have to sort of bolster it by showing the reaction, the results of that. It's hard to do, but hey, I'll be the first in line to see that movie if it ever gets made. We shall see. And speaking of video game movies, here's a letter from Imagination Connoisseur. As if it pops up, if I can pop it up, this is actually from Owen Toohey. Hi, Rob. You know what really grinds my gears? The term video game movies. I don't believe such a genre exists. Don't get me wrong. There are definitely movies that are adapted from video games, as well as movies adapted from books such as Gone Girl, Ready Player One, etc. But it's not like there's a whole genre for book adaptation movies. So why should Hollywood be reluctant to greenlight more video game movies? Video games come in all different genres, appeal to different demographics, and have an array of different characters. So when there is a trend or pattern of bad video game movies, it's really just a coincidence. In principle, there's no reason why a screenwriter can't produce a good script on existing source material, even if it isn't literary. And it's not like the average Joe audience member will be reluctant to see a Skyrim movie because they didn't like Assassin's Creed. There's no correlation there. The same could be said of live-action anime adaptations. While they may look the same in anime form, their stories come in all different genres. Because like video games and books, animation is a medium. Studios keep churning out these movies until something sticks to the wall. And if Alita Battle Angel wasn't successful at the box office, there's no reason why an Attack on Titan movie can't make money. Do you think there's an underlying prejudice going in on studio boardrooms toward these types of movies? Owen Toohey. Well, Owen, that's a good question. Look, Hollywood only cares about one thing. They care about things that are successful. And they look at video games, certain video games and franchises like the Assassin's Creed franchise, hugely successful worldwide. So they figure, oh, let's make a movie based on the Assassin's Creed world, and people are going to come see it. Well, what's interesting is that the way video games are set up, as I was saying before, don't necessarily lend themselves to the kind of nuance that movie and television storytelling require in order to be effective, because they're not designed that way. Video games are designed, the stories in video games, to get you to various new gameplays. I mean, I love Grand Theft Auto 5. You switch between the three characters as you played it. And I love that game, but I don't necessarily know if it was such a riff on movies that you've seen and movies and television shows that you've seen before, that I don't know if they could ever make a Grand Theft Auto movie and have it be satisfying, because it's a pastiche. You know, your Grand Theft Auto Vice City was, if nothing, if you're playing Miami Vice, basically. And we saw Miami Vice on TV for what, 5 seasons? So to do that kind of a video game, it's just a variation on a theme, or Saint. Why am I drawing a blank on that name? You know, that other crime video game, something Saints. God, I'm drawing a blank now. But again, video games are when you're watching or playing Uncharted. Uncharted is kind of a riff on Indiana Jones or something else, and combined, and it's already something that we've seen in the movies before in some way, shape, or form. That's where they get a lot of their ideas. I mean, like Cyberpunk, what is it, 2077, that Keanu Reeves is in, owes a huge debt of gratitude to Blade Runner. So video games have already been so influenced by movies that when you're translating them back into cinema, it's hard. I think it's really hard to do something like that, to do it effectively. I'm not saying it can't be done. I just think it hasn't worked out very well in the past. But I would like to see it. I'd like to see it. I'd hope it would work. I think that would be interesting. Ian Samuels is here. Then I don't know if this is true. Ian Samuels says, "Hey Rob, I tweeted Kathleen Kennedy at Lucasfilm and I got a reply. I pointed out the fact that all writers and directors she has brought in to make new Star Wars have been all white males, and suggested that there were more than likely female writers and writers of color that have Star Wars stories, and suggested she give some of them a chance. I also added that I am a writer. She could give me a chance." Her response was just, "Okay, white male, Ian." What do you think about that? Well, I think that's pretty damn funny and witty of her, if that's true. I mean, you know, it's funny of you to write a letter about female writers and writers of color, and that you should give them a chance, but at the same time you say that you're a writer and she should give you a chance as a white male. That's funny. You got to give it up for Kathleen Kennedy. That was I think that that speaks to one, she has a sense of humor, but she also is making a really interesting point. You know, but that's funny. Did that really happen? Is that true? Here's something. I've not seen Netflix's The King, but Evan Newman writes in. This is from Evan Newman. "Dear Rob, I watched Netflix's The King last night, and man, am I satisfied. In true Netflix fashion, I had not heard of this movie's existence until a trailer for the movie played when I opened up my account on November 1st, the day the movie dropped. I was hooked, but I also had my guard up. The cast looked great, and being the history buff I am, I actually just finished listening to a podcast about the 100 Years' War, so I got that this movie was made for me feeling. At the same time, this was basically a straight-to-Netflix release with a super tiny theatrical release, so I was concerned that the final product might be less than the sum of its apparent parts. Happily, this was not the case. I quite enjoyed The King, and I truly wish I could have witnessed it on a big screen. The King is an adaptation of Shakespeare's Henry IV and V plays, which were in turn based on historical events near the beginning of the end of the 100 Years' War. There are Shakespearean purists who may balk at the film not using his words in this retelling. Others might wonder why the plays were adapted instead of the actual historical events. Well, Shakespeare already did the heavy lifting of turning these events into a narrative, so why not use his stories as a framework for a new movie? As a human being with an internet connection, anyone can look up what historians have written on these events or read Shakespeare's plays. After 400 years, I think it's okay to retell a Shakespeare story without Shakespearean language. So just relax, people, and open yourself up to a good retelling of a great story. But back to the film. Ben Mendelsohn is a presence as the petty and Trumpish stand-in for modern viewers, Henry IV. Lily Rose Depp does a lot with very little screen time. Sean Harris is great as always with his "You can trust me, I promise" voice. Joe Edgerton is Joe Edgerton. Timothy Chalamet as Henry V brings that heavy lies the crown feeling and finally sold me on him taking on the Paul Atreides role in Dune. And Robert Pattinson's French accent steals every scene it's in. What a brat. As one might say to Maximus Decimus Meridius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, who will have his vengeance in this life or the next, I was entertained. Now, is it perfect? No. I think this film is a great example of the downside of watching a movie on the small screen first instead of the big screen. Some of the narrative happenings felt a little sudden, which could have been due to writing or editing, but I think had more to do with the visual presentation and storytelling happening on screen. There are many wide shots in this movie with multiple characters present. I think some of their motivations may have been cleaner if you had a better look at their facial expressions, reactions, etc. during these scenes. Unfortunately, I came away feeling that smaller screen had a limiting effect on the storytelling happening in this movie. Anyway, even though it's not perfect, and God forbid a new movie not be perfect, I really did enjoy this movie. I hope it has as much success as it can and that we get more epic historical dramas over the next decade. Does it have the St. Crispin's Day scene in it? We few, we happy few, we brand of brothers. The well has been dry for a while and I want it refilled with great battles and medieval politics. Thank you for reading, Evan N. Well, Mr. Newman, I want to say I've heard a lot of people say that the King is really good, and I'm in. I think you're right. There's no reason why you can't adapt Shakespeare, who's one of our great storytellers, because his narratives work. His language is tough to get through for modern audiences. We don't speak English that way anymore, and it's tough for people to understand. And I think that there's no reason why you can't adapt his stories and use modern English. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, sure, Shakespeare's writing is masterful, but it is hard even for the actors who, if you're not up on your Shakespeare, and look, I know all actors are supposed to be great Shakespeare scholars, but that's tough. It's tough. And if you're not up on your Shakespeare, you don't know necessarily how to speak it correctly, and it's tough. So I have no problem changing those narratives. It's not like they called it William Shakespeare's Henry V or Henry V or Henry IV. They didn't say that. They just called it the King. So I think that's a good way to adapt these kinds of stories, get people more interested. Look, also using the original text and taking liberties with it or cutting it down. Look what Baz Luhrmann did with Romeo and Juliet, which I like to call the Blade Runner of Shakespeare movies. But yeah, I'm going to check that out. I mean, from what you said, that's something that I would actually be interested in totally reading. Yeah, there's mosquitoes. We have the door open. They're everywhere. This one comes from Brian Eng, longtime Imagination Connoisseur and member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Rob, I don't read much sci-fi. Is there a story that deals with the aftermath of machines beating humanity? Wouldn't the machines get bored? Would they evolve to have emotions out of boredom? Would they explore space? Well, Saturn's Children, which is Charles Stross, a good, fantastic writer. He wrote, hang on, is it Saturn's Children, Neptune's Children? He wrote a series of books about humanity has fallen and AI has taken over. Those are the books that pop off here. Hang on, let me tell you what they are, because I really I want to say Saturn's Children, but I want to be clear on this. Yes, it is Saturn's Children. I would strongly recommend reading Saturn's Children. I quite enjoyed Saturn's Children, but yeah, it's about a world after man is sort of gone. And there is sequels. Let's see. And I think, well, they're short stories, but he's written other works in that universe. But that was just the thing that first came to mind, was Charles Stross's Saturn's Children. And it's interesting. But yeah, I think there's a lot of, even, what is it, Sex, Death, and Robots. The Netflix show has a couple of great episodes that deal with robots after the fall of man. Sex, Death, and Robots. What's the name? I have to look it up. But there's a one episode in particular that I think is definitely worth watching, but I don't remember the name of it. But yeah, definitely check that out. But there's a lot of sci-fi that deals with that. I mean, hell, even Spielberg's AI deals with that. You know, when I remember when the movie first came out, people were like, what about the aliens at the end? And I'm like, those aren't aliens. Those are the natural evolution of our machine, of the AIs, that when they free little David, is it David, the kid's name? And people didn't quite get that. It used to drive me crazy. Koba says, Usagi Yojimbo movie, just saying. Again, I'm surprised we haven't got a Usagi Yojimbo movie yet. I would see that. I mean, that's been around for a long time. What a great comic that is. And I'd love to see something like that. Eduardo Cruz says, hi, Rob. First time super chatter, longtime fan. What do you think of the upcoming Halo TV series? Well, speaking of talking about video games, I mean, the Halo universe is a really interesting universe. But again, it's like you've got to, again, flesh out your characters. You've got the Halo universe, but you can't put your universe before your characters and your story. And if you're going to do the whole thing about Master Chief and all that, you've really got to come up with great characters and a great story. And you've already got the framework. You've already got the universe. Well, what you really have to do is create. And here's the problem. Whatever you're going to do with that character, they're not going to be in battle the whole time. You know, they're not going to be playing. You've got to turn them into people. You've got to make them people first, and then go into the situations that Halo details and all of that. I mean, just like if you were going to make a Metroid Prime movie with Sheamus or whatever, you have to create great characters and a great story before you can get into the action. And I wonder, I mean, Halo has a rich mythology already, but you're going to have to create characters out of whole cloth. I mean, what's really, really interesting is, for the record, or hypothetically, let's say that I'd been working on a project that was based on a video game. Let's say I'd been doing that. What's really interesting, hypothetically, about this particular show that I'm hypothetically working on, in a very small way, but the creator of this hypothetical show was basically given free reign because this video game didn't have a structure or characters that you could adapt. And what's been really interesting, hypothetically, is to see how this show has been developing. And it's really interesting. And I think as far as video games go, this hypothetical show it's developing very nicely. And I'm sort of learning as I watch from afar how something like this might be hypothetically developing. And I think as far as a video game adaptation, this hypothetical video game adaptation there's going to be lessons learned hypothetically from it in the future, if it in fact is a real thing that people could one day see, maybe. But it's been interesting to watch how, and hypothetically, who knows how the video game fans would respond when you're creating a brand new narrative out of whole cloth, which, you know, hypothetically, the creators of any kind of a series they made from this particular video game would have to do. So it'll be interesting to see. You know, one of the movies, World of Warcraft, the World of Warcraft film, I was actually interested in because of there aren't necessarily defined. There's races and things like that, but you don't. When you think World of Warcraft, you think about a universe, you think about a world, and you think about types, but you don't have a Tony Stark. Is there? Maybe I just don't know. Is there a Tony Stark in the World of Warcraft that you could have brought in and adapted? I mean, it's hard. It's hard. It's interesting. But as far as Halo goes, again, if they create a really interesting character and you have compelling actors and you have a great writing staff and they have people directing that know what they're doing, I think you could probably do something great with a Halo movie, or TV series, but we'll see. Somebody believes that we can. That's why it's actually happening. But I would like to see a good Halo show, only because I think a great Halo show, if it was done well, would be a really interesting science fiction series. And that's what I would like to see. Rick Berg says, all one can be with video games is no matter how good you play or your knowledge, you can only be second best. That's interesting. All one can be with video games is no matter how good you play or your knowledge, you can only be second best. Well, that's true, but that doesn't necessarily affect somebody adapting a video game into, like Halo, into some kind of an ongoing concern. I mean, I think the real thing is that yes, there have been lots of storylines touched upon in the Halo video games over the years, but does that lend itself well to a narrative feature? Because obviously you flip the script when you're doing a Halo show, the battle scenes would be a small portion of what you're watching, but it would have to be much more character based and all of that kind of intrigue, because with Halo the game, it's all about gameplay. It's all about those battle scenes. It's all about playing. Whereas that's not what watching battle scenes, you go from battle to battle to battle in a TV show, it just gets boring. That'll take care of itself. So it'll be interesting. I think that's a problem for a Halo video game. We'll see if they can make that work. Stephanie Littlepage says, Rob, just letting you know that Captain Robert April, who I've known online as an online presence for years and years, was in a bad accident. In case you didn't get my email, he's in the hospital. I don't know if I saw that. That's terrible. Well, Stephanie, I hope he's getting better. That's terrible. Yes, I hope he's okay. I hope he's doing better. I hope he's recuperating. I'll have to look for your email. I apologize if I haven't responded to that. I mean, I haven't responded to that, so I apologize. But I will definitely look into that. Please give him my best, absolutely, and tell him I hope he recuperates. Let's see. This is an interesting. This comes from Paul in Long Beach. Morning, Rob. Like yourself, in June of 1982, I stepped into a theater at the Twin Pines Lone Pine Mall. Okay, in reality, it's the Puente Hills Mall, to see a little film called Blade Runner. By the way, it's funny you say that. I'm wearing a Rachel shirt that one of those Facebook ads popped up online. I'm like, hey, how can I not get this shirt? When the card proclaiming Los Angeles, November 2019 appeared on the little screen, did the young man watching have any concept that he'd still be alive to see this period in time? As per any futuristic sci-fi, it's easy to pick out what the creators got wrong in their vision. Yeah, we still don't have flying cars, and damn, I'd love for LA to get rain on a regular basis. But what did they get right? City speak is kind of a thing, as are the giant digital billboards dominating downtown. The one feature that filmmakers got absolutely correct: back then they were few and far between, but now there are noodle shops everywhere. My inner foodie thanks you, Mr. Scott. Paul in Long Beach. That's funny. I think what I've always found annoying, one of my pet peeves, is when people punch holes in how visions of the future didn't quite come to pass. I mean, I've been listening to people say, well, Kubrick got it wrong. Pan Am doesn't exist anymore, and yet Pan Am was in 2001. I'm like, okay, but but I don't think that the point necessarily was that Kubrick got it right or wrong. It was the fact that Kubrick took a brand like Pan Am or the telephone company or Howard Johnson's, which was a big thing at the time, and put them in a science fiction context. You never really saw that before 2001. I mean, who would have thought that, I'm going to make the ship that's taking Dr. Hayward Floyd up to Space Station 1, I'm going to make it a Pan Am ship. I mean, that was pretty neat. And that was really the first time that you saw product placement in science fiction films. And then speaking of Blade Runner, Blade Runner only came out a little over a decade after 2001, came out less than 15 years afterwards. And, we saw how many brand names that did you see in Blade Runner? I mean, just off the top of my head, you can just rattle off things like TDK, and is there still TDK tapes or floppy disks or whatever? Atari, of course. I think that you never know how it's going to go. You just never know how it's going to go. But I think it's interesting. It's not necessarily the actual spot on details. It's the spirit. Did 2001? Sure, we're not in space the way we are in 2001 as depicted in 2001. But what was interesting was the cover up that Haywood Floyd had to participate in when they found the monolith at TMA-1, the crater. I could see that happening, and I think there's a lot more truth in 2001 than people might realize upon first glance. But yeah, look at what Blade Runner did get right. I mean, clearly there was some kind of a problem where it rained all the time in LA. So it was definitely imagining a world 37 years ago where there's some kind of climate upheaval. That's pretty interesting. And the fact that, yes, that noodle shops have taken over Los Angeles. And by the way, we're all the better for it because I love noodles. They're delicious. Elizabeth and I go to this one noodle place in Old Town Pasadena, and I can't get enough. It's great. So I think we're all the better for it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's interesting to see which things came true and which things didn't. So, yeah, what a world we live in. But that's always fun. It's always fun to go play that sort of sci-fi bingo, for whether movies came true or not. Yeah, so sort of interesting. So I want to thank Paul for writing in about that. It was just a coincidence, by the way, that I wore this Blade Runner shirt. This Franz M, my man Franz, who I thought was living in Germany like Dieter Bastian, but isn't. He's Canadian, but Franz M, a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community, always writes in thoughtful letters. This is an interesting one. I'm sure. Buckle up for this one, people. Another letter about toxic fandom. By the way, one of the channels, I want to say it's Den of Nerds. Hang on. Let me find out. One of the nerd YouTube channels, and I consider myself a nerd YouTube channel. I want to say it's Den of Nerds, but let me check. Let me see if it is Den of Nerds. I'll know. Okay, yes. Den of Nerds came out, I guess it was yesterday or 2 days ago, and he had a clickbaity headline that said something about how he was going to join the Fandom Menace. And of course, the Fandom Menace has been something we've talked about. The Fandom Menace is a group of channels that identify with a certain, and they've called themselves our own Mark C. Mark Chure identifies himself as a toxic fan. But so the Den of Nerds came out with an idea about fandom, Star Wars fandom specifically, where he came out and said, I want to bring people together. So he proposed, rather than have the Fandom Menace, he wanted to start something called the Gray Order, where both sides, whether you are part of the Fandom Menace or part of somebody that isn't, or somebody who's more positive, and you could come together, and he was promoting unity amongst the fan base, which I thought was a good idea. But as he pointed out, by doing that, you're now drawing another line. You're carving out a section of fandom for yourself, where now people are going to label themselves like I'm part of the Gray Order. But at least I thought it was interesting, and I give it up to him for doing that. So Franz M says, hi, Rob, did you hear Jar Jar Binks tried to kill himself because of fans? I get hate over my YouTube channel all the time, and you know what I do? I ignore it. If I couldn't, I wouldn't be on YouTube. Besides, he's probably lying or exaggerating. Either that, or he's both a pussy and an idiot. Or he could be mentally unstable. I guess you'd have to be insane to want to play Jar Jar Binks. As someone who did once try and kill himself, I was an immature teen without the proper coping mechanisms, going through a breakup while suffering a chemical imbalance. I can't imagine anyone feeling that emptiness just from words, no matter how vile. Insults are inside the realm of normal experience, but suicide is not. In Canadian law, we are deemed guilty of a crime in part if the action we have done could have reasonably been foreseen by a rational person as resulting in the crime we are accused of. No rational person would accuse you of causing my attempt if I tried to kill myself because you picked on me every day, for instance. That's not how that works. In my experience, suicidal people are suffering primarily from a usually temporary mental imbalance that, when compounded with misfortune of everyday life, can momentarily make them seriously seek a drastic solution. People need to take responsibility for their own mental health and get professional help. That is the solution, not blaming other people who are mean to you on social media. Well, there's 2 court cases that have been grinding through the courts that say differently. If you think a fandom is so fucking toxic, then don't participate in it. Don't read reviews or comments. If you do, you need to accept that other people have strong opinions expressed in a way you might not like. One of the few drawbacks of being in one of the most successful movie franchises in history and making millions of dollars on top of that, that is the reality of being online. So grow a thicker skin and learn to ignore the comments you don't like. If you cannot do that, if you were like David and Dan of Game of Thrones fame and so weak, pathetic, and out of touch that a Canadian cripple online calling you a talentless hack is enough to make you not want to make a Star Wars movie, then you have serious mental health issues you need to sort out before you do anything else in life, and you certainly have no business making a Star Wars movie. By the way, Rob, when I call them talentless hacks, I trust that you know that I'm being slightly hyperbolic. For instance, David Benioff can write a decent novel. Franz M. Well, dude, you know what? I'm going to disagree with you, and I'll tell you why. You know, when I wanted to make movies, for instance, and you finally get to do that, you finally achieve those goals, you are making movies for other people, you know, and Tango Shalom, I've worked on for 3.5 years. Now, I know that the movie, it's certainly not going to be anybody's Endgame, and it's not going to be anybody's Star Wars. It's a nice little independent movie with something on its mind. But I want people to like it. I've invested 3.5 years of my life to make that movie the best it can be. Now, my policy is, if you put work out into the public, like you said, there's just going to be people that hate you. There are. I had a film festival program thrown at me after a screening of Free Enterprise in Dallas. A woman was so offended by it. There are going to be people that don't like you. And I understand that. I do understand that. But sometimes there is such vitriol thrown your way. It can definitely, even the smartest, most intellectually aware person, you know, you don't make a movie for people to dislike it. And I'm sure when Ahmed Best was tapped to play Jar Jar Binks, like we talked about Kelly Marie Tran a couple days ago or a couple shows ago, this is the dream of a lifetime. And when you're making a movie and you're doing these things, there's no downside to that. You're having a great time. You're in the first new Star Wars movie. You know, you don't write Jar Jar Binks. You trust that director George Lucas and writer George Lucas is going to create a character that the audience is going to love, because why wouldn't they? You know, why wouldn't people love the movie that they're in? I mean, can you imagine, you know, you're hired to play little Anakin Skywalker and you think you're a kid, you've hit the jackpot, you've hit the lottery. And if you think about what happened to a lot of these people because the world at large didn't like what George Lucas did, and how, I mean, we're still talking, Jar Jar Binks is 20 years old now, and we're still talking about how much he sucks. I mean, imagine if you're the person that embodied that character. You know, and at the time, you really thought your life would change and you would have something wonderful happen to you. And it turns out to be something that you're going to be forever pilloried for on the internet or in culture, pop culture, forever. And it's not even something that you had any control over. So I think that, you know, yeah, you can say that everybody should have a thick skin. And I get it. Like I've said, Life is hard, and then you're going to die. I have one foot in the grave. You can never outrun death, and one day it's coming for all of us. But you would hope that when you're trying to do good work in the time that you have here, that your good work would be respected and liked. And when it comes to something like Star Wars, I mean, I know what it's like to have a dream and to get to make to get to do what you wanted to do in life. And then to have you, when you find out that when it finally comes out, you have all these hopes and dreams wrapped up in a project, and when it comes out and people literally hate it, I don't care who you are, eventually that's going to get to you, man. It's going to get to you because you can't not take it personally at some point. I mean, I know that whatever I've done, I'm always going to suffer. Look, somebody they downvote these conversations before they even go on the air. And upvotes and downvotes affect your YouTube analytics. And it bothers me when somebody gives me a downvote before I even go on. But, I get enough to offset that. But somebody's an asshole. Somebody is coming to my page every day and downvoting my channel. Why? And if I let it get to me, it would be like, well, fuck this. I'm not going to talk on this channel anymore. I don't need to go here. I'm trying to I really am. My job here is to hopefully bring entertainment, put a smile on everyone's face, and build a community and have a good time talking about stuff that we love. But our Weiss and Benioff spent a decade of their lives working on Game of Thrones. And in their minds, they delivered the best thing that they could. And when somebody doesn't like it, they get, to the point where I can't even imagine how, after putting in a decade of time on the work that you've done, and most of the time people love what you did, and then suddenly people turn on you. I don't care how strong of a person you are. You take it personally, especially when you do work. When you're doing work that is specifically made for other people to enjoy. You're making a Star Wars movie, and no one ever is going to think to themselves that they're making a Star Wars movie, well, someone's not going to enjoy this when they're making it. And look, I say this as somebody who cannot stand what J.J. Abrams did with Star Trek. But at the time, everybody thought when they were making those movies that, hey, these are going to be great. And indeed, a lot of people love those movies. So as many people like myself who couldn't stand what J.J. Abrams did, there's a lot of people that love Star Trek. Love Star Trek 09, love Into Darkness. There's a lot of people, that's their first Star Trek they ever saw. And one of the things I try and be mindful of is I try and remember that there are those people out there. And if they like something, if somebody likes something, you should allow them to like something. But what's interesting is online, especially in our fan culture, there are now people that are going to tell you, well, you're either an idiot or you're stupid or you're an asshole for liking something. And, I think that's weird. I think it's weird that we should tell people that if they like something, they're wrong for liking it. No, they like something. You're never going to convince somebody. No one's ever going to convince me not to like Tough Turf, which, by the way, allow me to remind all of you, Tough Turf, directed by Fritz Kirsch, the great 1985 film that stars James Spader, Kim Richards, and, of course, Robert Downey Jr. in a precursor to Avengers Age of Ultron, is apparently streaming on Amazon Prime. And if you haven't seen Tough Turf, it is one of the most delightfully goofy teen movies that came out of the 80s that I have a particular affection for. But if anybody told me that I was an idiot for liking Tough Turf, I'd be like, no. First of all, why would you want to tell me that? Why would you want to try and yuck my yum? Why would you try and do that? So if somebody likes something, I'm the first person to go, well, I'm glad you like that. But I'm not going to, tell somebody they're an idiot. And as far as Ahmed Best, the guy thought that he had the role of a lifetime. And look what happened to him. I would be like, what? Also thinking about the fact that where's your career going to be? Where's your career go after your Jar Jar Binks? Can you ever get another job? Will anybody ever hire you again? Not to be flip about this, but there's a lot of people that have done a lot of bad things in the world that shouldn't be out in the public eye again. But Ahmed Best being Jar Jar Binks is not one of them. Anyway, that's kind of what I believe that. And I think about it. I feel bad. I feel bad. Like I think about Kelly Marie Tran and Ahmed Best probably more than I should, because I know what it's like. You've made something and you think, my God, I'm getting to do something I've dreamt of my whole life. And, you know, you want it to be good. And when it turns out to not be good, where does that leave you as a person? It's man, it's a bummer. It is a bummer. But yeah. And I get sad when I hear about that. This one, another letter from Chris Pavoto. Chris, obviously a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Hello, Chris. Thanks for writing in again. Post your thoughts below after. Go to the website. You can read these all these letters. They're all posted on the website, by the way. Good day to you, Rob, and to the wonderful listeners. Time to put your Star Trek hat on, please. Do you want me to put my Star Trek hat on? Really? I can't believe it. 2 questions. I'm curious about your answer. 1, do you have a saucer section preference? Do you prefer a circular saucer section on your starships, such as the Constitution, the Miranda, the Akira class, for example, or an arrowhead, such as the Steamrunner, Norway, or Nova class, for example, or the oval that the Enterprise D and E have, or the Intrepid class, like Star Trek Voyager? And why? Well, dude, since no one's ever asked me that question in my half century of existence on this planet, no one has ever asked me my Star Trek Starship saucer section preference. So I'm going to answer definitively. I prefer a round saucer. I've had a round saucer my whole life. I think there's something elegant in that design. I like the way the saucer works with the secondary hull and then the warp nacelles. And I think I like the idea that the ship is kind of compartmentalized. Now, when I saw the Enterprise E, where the oval sort of flows into the secondary hull, it all becomes a piece. It's like a sculpture, which is cool, but there's just something less classical about it. I mean, ultimately, there is something both modern and retro. My favorite thing in life is the refit Enterprise from motion picture. It's my favorite. Look, I love Starship Enterprise so much. I was so worried because before Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, there was pre-release artwork that was based on previously existing Enterprises from like the Phase 2 series. I was worried because I built so many models of the Enterprise when I was a kid. Literally my favorite thing, and still to this day, the Starship Enterprise. I can't pick up a Starship spaceship, a Federation ship that has warp nacelles, a saucer section. I can't pick one up without feeling a tingle in my heart, joy in the very fiber of my being. And when I saw what they did with the motion picture Enterprise and how they made it sleeker, and I know the warp nacelles went from being tubes to being sort of elongated. It didn't matter. I thought what they did was like the coolest thing ever because it was really thought about when they did it. And I love the fact that it was still a saucer, and it was great. And when they changed, look, a lot of people, I have come to love the Enterprise D, but it's not attractive. It's kind of like the AMC Pacer, which is a car my dad used to call the pregnant peanut when I was a kid. The AMC Pacer was not a good looking car. The Enterprise D, I understand it was like sculpture in space or something, and it's roundish lines, and there was something about the Enterprise D that never sat well with me. It didn't look like it was part of the same lineage. I've come to accept it, and I've come to like the Enterprise D. But once you made me like the Enterprise D, then I had to go accept the Intrepid class, the Starship Voyager, and the Enterprise E, which are fine. And the Voyager is fine, but it doesn't look as elegant to me for some reason. So I'm definitely a fan of the saucer section. So that's one part of your question. The second part is, you say, please put yourself back into early 2001. Whatever your job was at the turn of the year, you get a call from Paramount and seek your extensive knowledge and enjoyment of the Star Trek world. Your job is basically the Ronald D. Moore and Ira Stephen Bear for a new Star Trek show. and it would come out of Star Trek Enterprise. Not a back in time trick, but you get that call to captain the ship behind the camera. You produce the show. How would Mr. Burnett have wanted to do this show and have it be even more successful under the guidelines of a prequel to the original series? Well, I'll tell you something. I've often said that the greatest Star Trek show that isn't a Star Trek show that's on television is The West Wing. And a lot of people have said to me, especially I have friends who they think The West Wing is a silly show now. But to me, The West Wing was kind of like Star Trek. You had a group of people working for the good of everyone in this high pressure environment. And I like this ensemble cast. And I think what they originally wanted to do with Star Trek Enterprise, which was they were going to deal with the founding of the Federation, but the first season they weren't even going to leave Earth. And I really would have loved to delve into a group of people that were looking to, like a West Wing show where they dealt with the politics. I mean, there was so much interesting stuff going on with the Vulcans keeping us down and them not really respecting us, which I thought was pretty interesting. You know, you've never thought of the Vulcans as being necessarily the villains, but to me it made sense that they would look down their noses at us because we just didn't understand as much as, and they knew we were going to eventually get out into the cosmos, but I really would have spent a lot of time making it more a cross between the movie The Right Stuff and The West Wing and things like that. And I would have really concentrated. That way it could have all been allegorical. You know, you could have really looked into the response. What is the scientific responsibility to people? What is the political responsibility that we have? What would it like be having to deal with this group of people that was always putting you down? And I think one of the problems with Enterprise is they ended up falling back into Star Trek tropes. And they were writing, for the first 2 seasons, they were trying to write standard Star Trek stories because, and by the way, part of that reason was that's what the network demanded. They're like, you can't wait for a whole season to get your spaceship into space. That's not what Star Trek is. But I think it would have been really, really interesting. And I would have had characters. One of the things I really love about The Expanse is you have all these different tiers of characters. You've got the people on Rocinante, and then you've got the president, you've got the United Nations, and you see all these different political groups. I loved all that. I would like to have done more of that with Star Trek. And I would have done more ripped from the headline stories, not the way SVU does rip from the headline stories, but really deal with and show more of the Earth, you know, show more of people around the planet, like different nation states and how do we all move into space together, something along those lines. I would like to have, I would like to have watched a really complex show that really delved into the political structure. I mean, it would be exciting. You'd still make it a science fiction show, and you know, you go back out into space and come back to Earth, and that's probably what I did if I was having to make a prequel series. And of course, mine. Look what they did with the 4th season of Enterprise. There's so many good things, like when you're dealing with Terra Prime and demons, when you could have done that story, but being set on Earth when you're watching the rise of xenophobia, and I would have made that all part of it. Like, what happens when, you know, it's what's going to happen to our civilization if an alien race shows up and lands on the front lawn of the White House or something? We're going to go bananas. We are not mature enough as a people yet. We can't even talk about a Star Wars movie online without getting ready to kill each other. What's going to happen when an alien race drops down on our front doorstep and says, "Hey, here's how it's going to go"? You know, I think it would be it's certainly interesting, but that's kind of what I would like to have done. And I think that a real mature look. So, you know, a cross between The Right Stuff, The West Wing, Master and Commander, things like that. I would like to have seen that kind of a show, but make it really adult. I mean, as much as I liked Enterprise, I always felt Enterprise was kind of dumbed down. it was not as smart of a show as I wanted it to be, if that makes any sense. And, when they tried to do the Xindi arc in the third season, all right. But really, what you wanted to see was the founding of the Federation, and how did that work, and dealing with whenever they were doing that kind of stuff, in the Shadow of Pajem, those episodes like that. I liked all that kind of stuff, and there was enough in there that it interests me. And going back and looking at it again, Enterprise is better than what people give it credit for, but it's still not nearly as good as it probably should have been. And that was because, it was Rick Berman and Brandon Braga. It's funny, ironically, two of the guys that were, they were burnt out. They wanted to be doing different things. Yeah, so you never know. Oh, Josh says I might accidentally be on my webcam mic. You know what? That's probably true. I might have bumped my mic. This mic is very sensitive. I might have pulled it out. Well, no, I don't think so. No, it doesn't look that way. It looks like I'm still, maybe it's just because I'm back here and I'm not up here. That could be it. But yeah. Rick Berg says Jar Jar was a stroke of genius, as Lucas created a character that doesn't exist and made people absolutely have a human reaction to it. Wonder how many can do that or take the risk of doing that. That's pretty interesting. That's a really interesting take, Rick, that George Lucas was able to create a character like Jar Jar Binks, who was a virtual character, who people had such a visceral reaction to. It's unfortunate to me, and I saw it happen with Return of the Jedi. George Lucas, by the way, speaking of the book front, Paul Hirsch, who edited Star Wars, one of the editors of his new book, a long time ago in a cutting room far, far away, just came out. Boy, how excited I am to read that. 50 years editing Hollywood hits. I never thought a day would come where I would really be. I love books written by editors. I really do. And getting this book from Paul Hirsch, his filmography is just stunning, and who he had to work with. I can't wait. I don't expect it to be like a 70s tell-all where they're chopping fatty rails of yayo and doing them upright as they're cutting Star Wars. I'm sure it's not going to be that kind of a tell-all, but I'm very curious to hear what it's like from his editorial perspective. But yes, Rick, I think that's very interesting. I think you're absolutely probably right about that. And he doesn't get enough credit. But to me, Jar Jar Binks and the portrayal of Jar Jar, I'll tell you something really interesting. So Chris Gore, Film Threats Chris Gore, I talked about earlier in the show, he got me a copy of the Phantom Menace screenplay, I want to say about 3 months before Phantom Menace opened. Now, when I read the script, I actually really liked it because the portrayal of Jar Jar Binks and the Gungans and all the alien creatures, I did not read them the way that they were portrayed in the movie at all. And I read them as a sci-fi freak, and I've read hundreds and hundreds of science fiction novels in my time. I read these characters as the way I wanted them to be, which was much more adult in nature. And it was before, I want to say it's before I saw Jar Jar Binks, please, whatever. Misa, I didn't read it like that. I just didn't. And I really liked the Phantom Menace script. And when I saw the movie, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I thought the movie doesn't work because you don't believe any of the characters. The human beings in the Phantom Menace, and they all seem to be in a different movie. People talk about the acting in Star Wars being bad. I never thought it was bad. I completely believed all of those characters. Even when Carrie Fisher's speaking with a British accent occasionally, Governor talking. I recognize your, or Lord Vader, I recognize your foul stench when I was brought on board. No, that was Darth Tarkin. Charming to the last. I bought her. I bought it. I didn't sit there and go, oh, her accent's slipping or whatever. But Jar Jar Binks, I just didn't believe that anybody in a Star Wars universe movie would talk like that. And the Gungans, it seemed like this affectation that was done. Like, the kids will love this particular character. I'm gonna make Watto like it just. I didn't believe anything, and those decisions were, I thought, wrong-headed, and shows, it just showed how out of touch George Lucas was at the time with what he was doing. But I figured I saw the beginnings of that in Return of the Jedi, even though a lot of people like Return of the Jedi. But what are you going to do? What can you do? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to bring Robservations episode number 269, dude. If you're a Bill and Ted fan, Robservations 269 to an end. I have stuff I still have to do, but I want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks everybody for joining in on the chat. If you like these chats, I would ask all of you to please hit like, please subscribe, all of those kinds of things. I want to thank my moderators, the new moderators, of course, Jordy Lyons and Lewis Yu. Thanks for being here. Greg Smith, of course, Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and of course, Detective Jim, and the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden. We'll know, I guess, tomorrow if Mike Bodden, who will be back, if he's no longer mayor of Riverdale, Iowa, he'll have nothing to do with his life. So all he's going to do, I'm going to make him work on the Burnettwork harder than ever. I'm going to crack the whip, and he's going to be here moderating. Who knows? So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank everybody for writing letters. Mike has been catching up with all of your letters, and I'm deluge of letters. Inundated with letters every day. There's more letters every day coming in, so it's tough to get to all of them, obviously. But there's been really more interesting letters coming in, and people are really being thoughtful, and it's been really great. So if you want to write me letters, send them to the Burnettwork. Burnettwork.net. Go to the website. We've got so much content up there now. Of course, Allie Slate's column, The Feminerd Gaze. Looking forward to publishing another episode or another column from her. And she's got some exciting stuff coming up in the future. So I want to thank everybody for that. And I will be back. I will be on the John Campy Show. There will be no Robservations tomorrow. I will be on both the John Campy Show and the Weekly Hero. Then we are going to see Ford v Ferrari. So I will be gone all day. I will not be home. So there will be no Robservations tomorrow. I know. You can't bear to be without me. I know. Anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. And once again, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say, remember the 5th of November. Now, as always, everyone, have a better day.